Good morning, TEDxBucharest. After this movie about the future, I would like to talk about your future. So I'm here to talk about entrepreneurship. Would you mind raising your hand if you ever started a company before? Like this? That's quite a few people. What about if you would like to start a company but you haven't yet? Well, more. That's good. That's good. Well, I hope that on Monday you won't go to work, but you actually start your own company, and let's hope I can achieve that. So I will be talking about my personal experience. My name is George Alex Popescu. I am the CEO and founder of a few companies, among which is Boston Technologies, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. And I started the company while I was a student at MIT. And it's not my purpose today to actually convince you that starting a company is a good thing. I think most people, will agree to that. But I like data. I'm a scientist and engineer by training, so I have some data to back that up. So while I was there, the MIT president told us that right now, MIT alumni who are alive today started 25,800 active companies right now. Which doesn't sound like much. It's a small number of companies. And they employ about 3.3 million people. It's a large number, but doesn't mean that much to me. And these companies generate 2 trillion per year in revenue, in sales. And that's a very, very big number, but I don't know how big that number is. I think what really allows us to really get an idea how big that number is that if these companies were one country, it would be the 11th largest economy in the world. And for me, that's very, very big. So obviously, smart people start companies, and it's a good thing to do. I think we can go over all the reasons why it's good for you personally to start a company. It develops you, grows you, increase your skills and things like that. It's a good teaching. I think I learned more by starting companies and running companies than everything I've done in school, despite, 25 years of school maybe. It makes you a better human. And if none of these matter to you, from memory, I think 46,000 Americans have a personal net worth greater than $50 million. And we don't know the numbers, but I bet, if any, probably none, has made this money by actually being an employee somewhere. So once again, I'm not here to demonstrate that starting a company is good. I'll take it for granted, but this is some data that I think convinced the few who haven't raised their hands yet to raise their hand next time. I'll tell you what worked for me to start a company. Second step is starting the company. But before you actually start the company, in my case, and my limited knowledge and limited experience, I had to actually, and I realized later, I had to train my brain to think the right way, to really get the right mood, get in the right state of mind, and so on. And when people start a company, you think you need to be a problem solver. Yeah, of course. You need to be working hard. That's true. You need to be practical. That's true. Pragmatic, and blah, 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 so on. What was very important in my case is that you have to be in the right state of mind. And I put in the lower right corner here a little picture that gives you the idea that your brain can read that picture in 2 different ways. If you pay attention and if you think a bit, you can see 2 faces, or you can see a vase. And that's what I'm trying to explain here, which is, if you train your brain, you can control your brain to think the right way. And here's the first lesson I had. I realized later that when I was a student, I had this car, the Jeep. It looks cool. It was a bad car. It was a student car. I don't know if you had cars when you had no money. Break all the time, and they smell, sting, expensive. It was a really bad car. But it looked cool. And of course, one day the transmission broke. In the lower right corner is a picture of the transmission. It's a complicated thing. It's supposed to be the most complicated part of the car to fix. People would rather fix the engine than the transmission. Well, it broke. And I had no money as any student. I'm sure there are students some here, so I'm sure you know what it is like not to have money. And I wanted to get it fixed. I went to the mechanic, and the mechanic said it's going to cost $2,000 to fix this transmission. I don't know about you, but for me it was, I don't know, the end of the world. I had to throw it away. So luckily for me, I had in my research lab a colleague who told me the following. Listen, the guy, the mechanic at the car shop, he probably has a high school diploma. You have 2 masters and you're working on your 3rd master's. You probably can do the same work as he does. why aren't you doing it? And he told me that because I didn't have the right experience, knowledge, and tools. And he told me, acquire the experience and knowledge, buy the manual, buy the tools, and you can do it. And he convinced me. I guess he was a very good speaker. And I actually bought the manual, think like this, and got the tools. And in the kitchen with my roommate, we took the transmission apart. It was oil all over the kitchen, and there was like parts everywhere. And we numbered every part. We take pictures of where the parts came from. We put it back together, and it worked. For about a year, then it broke again. But that's not the point. What actually is a point here is that nothing is impossible. If you start by thinking the only way to do something is this way, or it's not possible to do, you never achieve it. So I use this lesson again and again, and it helped me many times. So first step, I think, to train your brain is, it's not impossible. You can build the next Facebook, the next Google. And they were not built overnight and so on. Talking about big companies, I'm sure you heard of Microsoft and Bill Gates. The second part I realized later about training my own brain is that I saw a documentary about Bill Gates. And I don't know if you know how he started his company. IBM came to see him and asked for his operating system, later called DOS. And he gave them everything he wanted. They wanted. Gave the DOS for a really reasonable price, no crazy conditions, except one small little detail. He decided to keep the intellectual property of DOS. And he then, as he kept it, he resold it to everybody else who started building manufacturing PCs, Dell, HP, and so on. So the part here that's also very important I learned from this particular scene, a particular documentary, is keep control, keep the intellectual property, keep ownership of what you build. And once again, it's my experience, but it also helped me very much. And the third part that really allowed me to think the right way about starting a company has been about finding the resources. If you ask me today, how can I find somebody to do I don't know what? Well, there are ways to find these people. I don't know how to do everything. In fact, I know how to do very small number of things. But I'm very confident that in a few months, I can find anybody I need to do whatever I need. Let me give you an example. We were looking for my company for a head of sales who had at least 3 times the experience to grow a company in technology and finance from 5 million to 50 million in revenue, was willing to travel overseas, was located in Boston, and had experience working with Japan. Guess how many people we found? We spent a lot of money on recruiters, and we found 30 people. 30. They were expensive recruiters, I agree. But it worked. So don't be disappointed. So what works very well in the US, and of course it varies place by place, this is a screenshot of Craigslist. It's free, you can post ads, and any ad we post to recruit people on this Craigslist, depending on the position, will get us tens, if not hundreds of applicants. So you can find the people to do whatever you need. Any company, any experience, you will find the people. So you're thinking properly. Anything can be achieved. You can find the resources, keep controlling the intellectual property. To my experience knowledge, that's all I needed. But there are many other things that people think are obstacles to start a company. And I would like to prove you through my own example that's not the case. People think you need an investor, you need money to start a company. Wrong. There are many companies who need no investment. Not everything, not all the time, all everywhere, but many of them don't need an investor. You don't need a VC. And you may have guessed I don't like VCs very much. People think you need experience in the field. Also wrong. It's not the case. You can start something you've never done before because through most people's scholarity, what you were taught was how to learn and how to think. What you learn in school doesn't matter. So you don't need the experience. And the last piece is you need a product. People think you need, I don't have anything to sell, how can I start a company? You don't need something to sell, a product you have. You will build it. That's what the company does. So I've been telling all these things, but let me tell you how it worked for me. So it's limited, but I think it may come handy. So I started the company 6 years ago with $0 investment. I found the first client, and they asked me to write software for them. and I had no clue what they were saying. I didn't understand anything they were asking, but I went on Craigslist and found a programmer who understood and did the work. I kept the intellectual property. We gave them the product at cost. We made 0 profit on the first client, but then turned around and resold it to all the other companies who had the same need, and made 90% profit on every sale there. And through these sales, grew the company. So we're now about 20 million in revenue. Doesn't matter, could be any number, but it's a viable company. We have offices worldwide, and we do about 60 billion a month in volume, trading volume, and so it's possible. And the company has grown by about 75% a year for the last 6 years. We got, Inc. 500 and other awards. So this is just an example. There are many of them. Many, many examples. It's just the one I know. So trying to extract from my experience more like a recipe, because once again, my target is for you on Monday. Don't go to work. You start the company, right? So find a client. Find somebody who has a need. Find somebody who's willing to pay money for that. If they're not willing to pay money for it, it's not a true client. They don't really need it. Then check the market size. So it's an experience learning from my bad experience. Before you start building, so one company I tried to do in the past was to paint little figurines for playing games. And there's not a big market for that. So, make sure that if you want to start a company, there is enough demand, enough market to make it useful. Then, remember I told you, you don't need financing, you don't need the product, but you need credibility. So you need to deliver some plan, very clear, low risk, and really organized of how you're going to deliver. This way, you can go to the client and say, look, I have this plan with milestones. These are the steps I'm going to take. This is how I'm going to achieve it. And give me a little bit the money up front so I can start and we'll do well. So that's what I did, and it worked very well. Then leveraging what you have. Once you have half a product, a quarter product, a product, start selling it elsewhere. Start selling it to everybody else. If one person has that need, there are other people who need it also. So leverage what you have. Experience, product, knowledge, geographical presence. Also focus on what works best. That's part of the reason why Boston Technologies grew so fast, is because when something worked very well, we push it up and we try to use it more and build on top of it. And something else that I think I learned the hard way, and I could have done better myself, focus on execution and quality. What's that all about? Well, if you have a good set of clients and you have a product and a market and everybody wants to buy your product, that's good. But if your product doesn't really work, you don't get very far. So having a really well-working product is going to really build you for a long time. So that's a recipe. It doesn't work everywhere, but I showed you how you can be successful with that. Now, once you start the company, Tuesday, you're going to have problems. And I want to warn you in advance. I think it's nice to be nice with you. And I need to warn you that as founder and probably head of the company, your title is actually head problem solver. And the only things you're going to get are the problems that nobody else wants to fix, can fix, is willing to fix. So you get only the really worst possible problems you can get. And there are a lot of problems, and they're going to make you stressed and worried and so on. So you have to be aware before you start a company on Monday that that's what life is like every day once you start a company. It's okay. There are good days and bad days, but you're a head problem solver. And then once the company is up and going, I want to give you a little bit more information about what worked for me too, maybe, which is the next steps. How will it be like? Well, people think there are about many resources, but 4 particular ones that people always think about. One is time, idea, money, and experience. So which one of the 4 is the most important, or are the most important? Have a guess? Well, ideas, there are lots of ideas out there. I'm sure every single one of you has many ideas. Money, you can find. Experience, you can buy. But time, you cannot buy, you cannot build, you cannot borrow, you cannot make more of it. That's what it is. So, as the company goes, maybe one thing you'll also notice, like I did, is time is one of your most valuable resources. So once again, you can buy experience, network knowledge, execution quality, but the other part that's important is to continue to innovate. And there's an equilibrium between simplicity and innovation, and yeah, you'll figure out, each of you will have a different company and a different lesson, a different way of doing it. But I want to point out a particular example from the space engineering. In English, a rocket engineer is supposed to be a very smart person, very educated. And the story goes that the US Space Agency has, in the past, tried to put together a vacuum cleaner for the space shuttle. And they did a project, they raised a lot of money, they actually spent time and money and effort and planning to put together a vacuum cleaner for space. And they achieved, they did the job. And then the story goes that the Russian space agency also wanted to have a vacuum for their spaceships. And what they did, they went to a local shop. They bought a local vacuum. They tested it to make sure it works in space, and that was it. So keep it simple. I think is probably one of the main lessons that I learned also in many years. So once again, thank you very much for attending today. This is my experience and my knowledge of starting a company. And I hope Monday you really, really take it very seriously. I think it's very good for everybody. Thank you.